What's up? For a while now, I've wanted to do a multi-camera CCTV security nerve center with a whole array of monitors so you can watch a whole bunch of different rooms at the same time, but there's a big problem with that. Typically, you'd use a separate camera to render things for each individual security camera, but I came up with a way that you can do it with just one, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Alright, so the first thing I want to do is make a quick monitor and a camera, so I'm going to clear out my scene and then add a plane. It's at this point I want to define the aspect ratio of my screen, and I want to do an old school 4:3 CRT style monitor. So what I'm going to do is scale this on the x-axis 4, scale it on the y-axis 3, and then scale it down by 0.25. And then, before I do anything else, I'm going to hit Control A and apply the scale. Alright, so now let's go into edit mode, and I'm going to subdivide this twice because I want the monitor to bulge in the center. I'm going to grab the edges and hit G to move them in the Z direction just a little bit. That should be good. Go back into object mode and right click and shade smooth, and then go back into edit mode. So we've got the screen, and now I want to make the frame, the box of the monitor. And to do that, first thing I'm going to do is, while I've got these edges selected, I'm going to go up to edge here and mark that as a seam, and then extrude in the Z direction, scale it out a little bit, extrude, just a scale extrude, and then extrude again. And back in the Z direction, you can see all the edges are marked as seams, so it won't try to shade it smooth. And then just press F to fill in that backside. And one last step is I'm going to clean up this mesh by selecting these edges and dissolving them. Dissolve edges. So, alright, so just to show you what's happening, this was a quad that we started with, and as you can see, it fills up the quad, and when we render from the camera, it's going to use a render texture, and it will fill that quad, but it will do it in a way that it will match the resolution of our monitor here. The last thing I want to do is I want to set the screen to be one material. So this is, let's say this is the box, and then we're going to set a second slot for materials, and this is going to be the screen. And since we have the screen selected, we can just do that, and now there we go, we have a monitor. One last thing I might do is just take this backside and scale it down a little bit smaller on the back, but you can get as fancy as you want with your monitor. I'm going to rename it here to Monitor 4:3, and I'm going to save it directly into my project, which I've already got here. I want to make a new folder and call it Models, and save it as Monitor 4:3. Now let's make a new project, and this is going to be our camera, and I'm going to start with a circle, and I'm going to make it a pretty low-res circle. We just don't need that many vertices. I tend toward low poly just to try to be efficient or whatever, but anyhow, let's go into edit mode and fill that And then what I want to do is I actually want to cut it by hitting K and just cutting from opposite corner to opposite corner. And then what I can do is select the center, or actually I want to select everything but the center. Can I do that? And then drag that down to Z just a little bit. It's probably not hugely important, but I don't know. I kind of like it. So then I'm going to shade smooth, and just like we did with the monitor, I'm going to mark this edge as a seam, extrude in the Z, scale it out a little bit, extrude, scale out a little bit, extrude back in the Z, and that's basically our lens. And then I'm just going to add a cube, move it all down a little bit so it kind of matches up there. Let's grab this backside and pull that down. Let's just scale these out a little bit. And move that down a little more. And what I would do is just set up a texture to give it a little more look, but this is just to really just the point where, well, our camera is going to be looking from. So let's go ahead and rename this CCTV camera and save it as CCTV camera to our models folder. So back in the project, we now have our models folder and we have our two models. And what I actually want to start with is the camera. So let's grab our camera model, and the scale is way off, but that's okay. We'll just fix it here for now. And then I'm going to set it up. Does it make more sense? I'm going to make it so it's facing from the back of the room. So let me see. We're going to scale it, aim it down a little bit, and that's kind of roughly, you know, where I want it. And obviously we would add a ceiling on here, but I'm just trying to expose things to show you what's going on. Alright, so we've got our camera sort of positioned where we want it, and then on that camera I want to add a script and call it CCTV camera. And the way that that's going to work is each camera is going to store its own render texture, and the monitors will hook up to a camera and grab that render texture and use it as their main texture, their base map in the universal render pipeline. And so let's write a little reference to that, and then we're gonna do on awake, I want to actually make that render texture, and that's pretty simple. You do new render texture, and then width, height, and color depth. And for the width, I'm going to use a pretty low resolution screen. It's going to be 160 pixel width and 120 height, and then just a color depth of 0. I'm not really concerned about that one, and that's all you need to do. And then I'm going to go ahead and do a little getter function just to have that, so we can get the render texture. Alright, so that's that, and save that. Back in our project, what I'm going to do is go ahead and grab this. I'm going to go to prefab and unpack it so I'm not making a variant. I'm going to create a folder that's going to be called prefabs, and grab that camera and drag it into the prefabs folder, and then we've got that. So now I want to make the monitor. So in our models, we have our monitor, and we move it in here, change things as you need to, get it positioned in place. It's pretty big, so let's just scale that down. What I want to do here is I'm going to make a script, and this one's going to be called CCTV monitor. Let me see, let's just get rid of this stuff. This is going to have a public CCTV camera, source camera, and we'll just set that to null. And then I want to do an integer screen material index. And so on our monitor, I want to know what index my screen is, and it's this one. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new material and call it monitor screen. I'm going to set it to be black. I'm going to set it to be pretty smooth, and I'm going to apply that there. So now we have the monitor screen. We can see that that is the first in the materials array. So that means that the index is indeed 0. So that's good. And if it's something else, if your model ended up with the index, with it be the material for the screen being the second, you may need to change that. And then I'm going to do reference to material, just call it matte. Now I do want the start function, and what I'm going to do in that is I'm going to grab the renderer and I'm going to make a list of materials, and this is going to be new list material, and then say rend.get materials, and you pass in that list and it'll populate the list with the materials in the renderer. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that that material that I defined up above is going to be a new material based off of our screen material. So it's just going to make a new instance because we're going to want to change the texture of that material separately. And we can get that by saying materials screen material index, and then it'll just copy that whatever material is in that index. And then we're going to say we're going to set that material back into the renderer in the correct position, and say rend.set materials, and that'll reset the materials. And then the other thing I want to do is I'm going to say if source camera not equal null, I'm going to go ahead and set things up based on that source camera. So I'm going to write a new function called set source camera and pass in source camera. Alright, so let's go ahead and write that function, and that's going to look a little like this: public void set source camera CCTV camera new source camera, and say source camera equals new source camera. the material, we want to set its texture, set its main texture, or I'm using URP right now, so it's actually going to be base map. In URP, it would be main text otherwise, and that's going to be set to source camera.get render texture. Alright, go ahead and save that. Let's go back into here, and I'm gonna go ahead and go to the prefab and unpack it, and then I'm going to make that into a prefab. Alright, so we have our monitor, and we have a camera, and the way this is going to work is each monitor is going to be paired to a camera. And you can embellish this and make it so that you can swap between which camera is being looked at on which monitor. But for now, I'm just going to grab this and drag it into the source camera slot on my monitor. And now that's all well and good, but we haven't actually set up the camera part. We've set up where the camera placement will be with this little affordance in the way of a little camera box. But what we need to do is set up something that will manage a secondary camera. I'm going to add an empty object, and that's going to be the CCTV manager. Alright, and I'm going to go ahead and reset that. This, I want to add a component of type CCTV manager. We're going to make a new script for that. So for this, I want, first off, a serialized field for a camera, whoops, and we'll just call it cam. And that's going to be that secondary camera that this is controlling. And then I want to do a list of CCTV camera. Whoops, that's not how you do that. And we'll call this cameras and instantiate it, initialize it, whatever word you want to use, as a new list of the cameras. And we're going to grab all the cameras in the scene and add them to that. And then I want an integer for the current camera index. Set it to 0. So the way this is going to work is it's going to take this camera and it's going to shift it between all the different cameras in the scene, one after another, in separate update steps. And one of the things that real-world CCTV cameras allow us is they take away an expectation that they're being updated constantly at like 60 frames a second or whatever. We can get away with updating them at a much lower frame rate, which gives us a lot of breathing room for our system here. And so the way that I'm going to work that is I'm going to set up a float, and we might expose this later, but I'm just going to do it this way. And I'm going to say they're updating every half a second. And I also want to set up a wait 4 seconds. And this is a coroutine thing. And we'll call it wait. Let's say null for now. It's okay, because I'm going to set it right here. I'm going to say wait equals new wait 4 seconds delay divided by cameras.count. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a coroutine to cycle through the different cameras and render each in succession. And that's going to be called shift camera and render. and then do that, and add I enumerator shift camera and render. And what this is going to do is this going to take the cam. You know what? I'm gonna rename this. I'm gonna rename this render camera. It's gonna take the render camera.transform.position equals camera's current camera index dot transform dot position. Render camera dot transform dot rotation equals camera's I screwed that up. Camera's current camera index dot transform dot rotation, and then say render camera dot render. And this is a special function on the camera itself that so long as the camera is not enabled, you can force it to render when you want it to render. And that way we're not rendering every frame, and we can save ourselves and optimize a little bit. And then once it does that, it'll update the render texture that's saved on the CCTV camera, and then we can increment the current camera index and also make it loop with a modulus. A modulus equals cameras dot count. And that way it won't go beyond the number of cameras we have. And then yield return weight, and I forgot to actually set this in a loop, so let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so one thing I forgot to do, I took out one script from when I made this previously. So alright, we moved it to that position, and then I need to say render camera dot target texture equals camera's current camera index dot get render texture. Alright, now save that. It needs that render camera, so I'm just going to go ahead and add a camera, which is down here, and I'm going to remove the audio listener because this is not our main camera, and I'm going to just disable that camera. And now go back on the CCTV manager, grab the camera and put it in the camera spot, and press play. Okay, so I realized I made another mistake. I set the monitor screen to be black, and I don't want that. We'll just set it to white, and then here we go. This should hopefully function as intended, and there we go. We have a single monitor. So there's our proof of concept. So that's working, and I'm actually going to do one more thing to the monitor, and I want it to be emissive, and I'm going to set the emission map, and I'm going to go ahead and set that to a gray. Back in the script for our monitor, I want to copy this and set that texture to our emission map as well as the base map. And now the screen will be a little emissive. You might not be able to see it, but it helps bring out the image a little more. Alright, so we've got our single screen. Now what I want to do is grab this camera. I'm going to duplicate it with Control D and just make one for each room. Something like that. Actually, another one over here, and we'll just do it aiming at the corner for now, but ideally this would be kind of panning. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab our manager and add, oops, let me see, grab the manager, hit that, and then grab all these cameras and add them into that as well. Now what I want to do is I want to make a monitor for each of those. So one thing I'm going to do is move this down and back a little bit, and also scale it down a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is just grab each of those monitors and link them up to the corresponding numbered camera. You could do this procedurally if you please, but that would mean I'd have to write more code. And 9. And now, so we've got them set up with the manager, and now we have our moment of truth. Let's fire it up. And if you've been watching that FPS, and I'm actually a little surprised by this, it's holding steady above 400 frames per second. And so now I have, in effect, 10 security cameras, and I can watch those shapes, you know, wander back and forth and do what they're doing, and just keep an eye on things. Isn't that neat? So what do you think? How'd I do? How did you do? Give me your thoughts and opinions, and I'll take them into account. And you can adjust this, you know. This is just, I just don't know that I'll actually get around to using this for a project. It's just an idea I've had, I wanted to try, and I mean, it's working. What can I say? I need a desk and some, like, coffee or something. Alright, well, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you found this useful, and I'll talk to you guys later. Alright, bye.